I felt as though a weight was lifted from my shoulders as I walked out of the testing room, where I had just taken my last final of the year and was greeted with beaming sunshine and a cool summer breeze. Though the walk back to my house was long, I enjoyed every second. This was my most successful year at university yet. I finished most of my classes with an A, on top of having completed multiple internships, the latter of which had wrapped up just a few weeks prior. I was ready to celebrate. You know that feeling of having a cloud over your head, reminding you of your responsibilities and impending deadlines? Well, for me, those were all fading away, all but one. I had been trying and failing to secure another internship or job for the summer. This had occurred to me once again while on my victory walk home that morning, ruining the overall mood. My thoughts turned away from thinking about how I would celebrate the end of my classes and toward how I was going to find a job. By the time I had made my way off of campus grounds and onto my street, my pace had slowed considerably as my mind became preoccupied. My gaze happened to drift to the cemetery on the other side of the street, something I often looked at while passing by. It had always felt out of place for me, sitting in the middle of apartment buildings and houses occupied by mostly students. Though, it wasn't just its location that felt odd. It has to be the most fenced-in cemetery I have ever seen. The fencing that surrounds this square plot of land is about 8 or 9 feet tall, and its quality is no joke. It's safe to assume that whoever put it up meant for it to be more than a marker of the cemetery's borders, or for decoration, with the exception seemingly being the ominous-looking gargoyles at each corner. The fence was most certainly built to keep people out. It was on this towering fence where I had noticed a new sign posted, and though I had still been across the street, the giant "Help Wanted" text was more than readable at that distance. I had never seen a single sign posted on the fence before, adding to my curiosity. I crossed the street to get a better look. As I approached the sign, I quickly made out the limited text that remained. See security booth inside for details. I glanced around the sign where I could make out the silhouette of a man inside the small wooden booth. Without hesitation, I proceeded inside. The man behind the booth window must have noticed my approach as he stood up and exited, facing me with a sincere, friendly expression. Though he appeared to be an older man by the looks of his white hair, he certainly looked healthy and spriteful for one, as he graciously sported a stylish black suit. "How may I help you today?" he asked in a warm tone through a deep and relaxed voice. "I just noticed the sign out on the fence there. Is that for some sort of job or something?" I asked, unsure. He bobbed his head back and forth. "Of sorts," he responded. I stood in silence and what must have been an evident expression of confusion as I awaited more details. "Why don't we take a walk?" he added with a small nod of the head and a smirk as he took a stride down the cemetery path. I followed, listening intently as we walked past the rows of headstones. "I don't intend to waste much of your time, so I'll get to the point. This place has been here for a long time. I would imagine longer than you might guess. Many keepers have looked over it through its time. This has been my role for more than 40 years, and I don't intend for that to change anytime soon. However, some, what you might call, extenuating circumstances have dictated that I leave my post for a few days to attend to another matter, and those whom I might regularly call on for situations like this are unavailable. The job I'm offering is simple. Act as its keeper for one night, and one night only. A night that just so happens to be exactly 1 week from today." I pretty much ignored the first half of what he had said entirely, as I was more focused on the fact that he mentioned the job was only for 1 day. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm looking for more of an actual job and 1 day of work. It's just not enough to..." He cut me off quickly. "For this shift, I am offering $2,000 cash upfront, off the books entirely." My mouth slightly hung open in shock for a few seconds before feelings of disbelief, doubt, and mistrust took over. I don't think we can do that. No, none of the university jobs would ever work like that. That would be unacceptable. He cut me off again. This cemetery isn't owned by the university. If it was up to them, this place would have been long gone by now. They don't have a say, and thank God for that. I again was silenced, unsure of what I had just walked into or what was going on at all. The man must have sensed this as his expression changed. My name is Marcus. I suppose it would have been appropriate to start with that. I told him my name and shook his hand reluctantly. He stopped walking, turned to me, and stared for a moment before reaching into his suit jacket pocket. As I said, I would prefer not to waste any more of either of our times. He pulled out a set of keys and extended his hand to me. The choice is yours, but I need you to make it now. I slowly reached out my hand and picked up the set of keys without much thought as to what I had agreed to by doing so. Good. Be back here in a week at 7 p.m. These keys will get you into my booth. I will leave you a letter. Read it before you start anything. It will tell you everything you need to know. Your money will be in the drawer next to the chair inside the booth. Marcus turned and walked away, leaving me in the middle of the graveyard, looking down at the set of keys in my hand. I pocketed them and exited the cemetery to continue my walk home. Though still confused, my mood lightened quickly as I considered the possibilities. Worst case, I show up at the cemetery a week from now with no money and I go home. In the best situation, I walk away with $2,000 for one night's worth of work. What did I have to lose? The next few days involved a lot of drinking, celebrating, and sleeping, followed by a few more days of unsuccessful job hunting. But I wanted to savor at least some of my summer before returning to the grind of everyday life. On the day I was supposed to work my shift at the graveyard, I woke up mid-afternoon feeling sluggish and with a raging headache from the night before. I considered staying home and hanging with my roommates for another night of getting wasted instead of walking down to the cemetery for what I expected to be nothing more than a scam. For some unknown reason, seeing the keys that Marcus gave me sitting on my otherwise empty desk motivated me to finally get out of bed. I decided that the 10-minute walk to the cemetery and back was worth seeing if I miraculously found the easiest $2,000 I had ever made. Without much else going on, I decided to head out early and I arrived at the cemetery around 6:30. I waited around for a few minutes before walking into the cemetery gates. I wanted to scout out the area for anything suspicious and given the circumstances. Who wouldn't? I found no sign of Marcus or anyone else who might raise an alarm in my head, so I decided to just go for it. I walked fast and with purpose into the cemetery and towards the booth on the inside. I pulled out the set of keys Marcus gave me, and with some luck, the first key I tried was the right one. I had partially expected none of them to work at all. As I pulled open the door, I caught a rather delightful scent. The small interior appeared simple, yet comfortable and unexpectedly clean. A single chair sat in front of a counter and window in a small square-shaped space. Beside it towered a large wooden cabinet with 2 doors and a lock. After a glance around the room, my eyes fixed on the small drawer below the counter. My heart began to speed up as I stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind me, locking its mechanism as I did. I fumbled through the chain of keys, trying each one on the small lock until the right one fit, causing my heart to skip a beat. I turned the lock and pulled it open to reveal a stuffed envelope. My hands scrambled to pull it out and count each fresh $100 bill. It added up. I counted it again, once more. I checked each bill for all the official markings and any signs of forgery. They were legitimate. I was so attentive to the money, I failed to notice the letter that had fallen out of the envelope as well. After stuffing the bills into my backpack, I unfolded the letter and began to read. To whom it may concern. Though the job offered to you may seem like nothing more than an opportunity to make a quick buck, the responsibility is far greater than you can imagine. Below, I have left a list of rules. Each is to be followed with extreme care and attention. There are few burial sites in the world as special as this one. The most important thing to remember is simply this: no one good has ever been buried here. 1. This cemetery has one gate, the only way in and out. This gate is to be closed by 8 p.m. and kept shut until sunrise. feel free to shut it sooner. No admittance by anyone, including law enforcement or emergency services, is to be permitted during this time. You, as the temporary keeper of this cemetery, are not allowed to leave these grounds until the sun has risen. The largest key amongst the set you have been given is for this gate. 2. As a consequence of being located in an urban setting with a younger demographic in its surroundings, this cemetery is frequently visited by those who call themselves ghost hunters or paranormal investigators. Though the gate should be locked for the majority of your shift, if you are to spot any such individuals entering or otherwise attempting to enter the cemetery grounds, you are to remove them immediately. You are permitted to call on law enforcement for the removal of such trespassers, but as stated, law enforcement is not allowed to step foot inside of the cemetery gates after 8 p.m. Get any trespassers out as soon as possible. God only knows what these fools would do if they found something real. 3. Another key on your chain unlocks the wooded closet next to you. Inside are numerous items, one being a suit much like mine, and a pair of shoes to accompany them. You must change out of your current attire and into this suit for the remainder of your shift. I have guessed your measurements as closely as I could before I ordered it. It may not be the best fit, but it will serve. They must think you're me. You may keep the suit once your shift is over. 4. I have placed white roses on 4 graves within this cemetery. Locate them. Inside the closet, alongside the suit, you will notice canisters of salt. After locking the gate, go to these graves and pour a circle of salt around each headstone. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the one thing you must be careful of is to leave a complete circle with no gaps. After doing so, remain as distant from these graves as possible and never disturb the salt circle. Keep an extra canister of salt with you at all times. 5. Above a few of the graves, you may notice bells hung up and a string that goes underground. These are remnants of an old practice from hundreds of years ago, invented as a safety measure for those who had been buried alive. If the body moved, the string would be pulled, the bell would ring, and a watchman, such as yourself, would know to dig them back up. These bells now serve a different purpose. If you hear a bell go off, encircle the headstone of said grave with salt. Like the others, keep away from the grave. There is another possible situation you may face with the bells. If several begin ringing at the same time in rapid succession, stop where you are and encircle yourself with salt as fast as you can. Give yourself some room, as you will likely not be able to leave your circle for a while. Remain still and do not be tricked into leaving or breaking the circle. 6. In each corner of the cemetery, you can spot a stone gargoyle. All 4 share the same design, a small body with bat-like wings and a devilish face. They sit atop the stone pillars that meet the ends of the fence. These face inward, towards the middle of the cemetery. If you happen to notice that one is missing, disregard it. If you happen to spot one that has been misplaced, turn away or close your eyes. Do not give any indication that you know it has moved. None of them will be a danger if you leave them alone. 7. Near the southwest corner of the cemetery sits a weathered headstone marking the grave of an unknown man. The only lettering left is what must be either the man's first or last name, Henry. No dates or other details are visible anymore. The only thing you need to know about Henry is that if he rises from his grave on your shift, watch your back and avoid going back to the security booth at all costs. Inside the front pocket of your suit jacket is a small box of matches. Light one and throw it to the grass on Henry's grave. Pay no attention to Henry if you spot him after you do this. You may return to the booth. When your shift is over, unlock the gate and leave the set of keys in the drawer. Best wishes and good luck. Marcus. I laughed at a few of the rules as I read them, appreciating what I assumed to be their intended humor and exaggeration. As funny as I found the effort Marcus had put into this letter, I decided that not a single rule would go neglected. No matter what kind of pranks might be pulled on me, $2,000 was worth going through all of it. I began by opening the wood closet next to me. Greeting me on the other side was a suit, as Marcus had mentioned. I marveled at its design for a moment. Though I had seen the same thing on Marcus before, I hadn't taken in its beauty as much then. I quickly changed out of my shoes and clothes and into the suit. To my pleasure, it fit like a glove. I don't know all that much about suits, but something about this one told me it was quality. Such a quality that I'm certain that I would never have been able to afford such a suit myself. I looked back to the list to read the first rule once more before folding and stuffing the letter back into my pocket. I figured this one would be easy to get out of the way. I grabbed my set of keys and headed out of the booth towards the gate. As I approached, I once again looked around in all directions to try and get a glance of someone who might be watching, or Marcus himself. Once again, I saw no one. I attempted to pull one side of the gate shut with only one arm, before realizing that it wasn't going to happen so easily. The metal gate was incredibly heavy, and though it sat comfortably on its hinges, pulling it shut took all the force I could muster. I needed a short breather between closing the first and the second. After closing both, I pulled up the largest key and inserted it into the keyhole. As I twisted the key, the satisfying noise of the lock mechanism clicking into place filled my ears. I turned away from the now locked gate and pulled out the letter again. I figured the ghost hunters shouldn't be too bad. I assumed they're a frequent problem for Marcus, especially at night. It isn't all that hard to imagine why this is, especially when considering what Marcus wrote in the second rule. Being that I hadn't gotten a good view of the whole cemetery yet, I decided to take a stroll through the area and look for anyone who might still be inside. While walking, an interesting thought occurred to me. Of the countless times I had passed by this cemetery when walking to or from classes, work, or anything else, I had never noticed a single visitor inside. I thought that I would have spotted at least someone visiting a relative that had been buried here, but to my recollection, no. I had never seen anyone. I recalled what Marcus wrote in his letter before the rules. No one good has ever been buried here. The thought made me uneasy. What did he mean by that, I wondered. After making a few loops around the cemetery, I confidently concluded that no trespassers were remaining. I began to make my way back to the security booth where I planned to mess around on my phone and maybe read the book I brought with me to kill some time. It was on this walk back to the booth that I happened to look down and see a white rose on the ground near a headstone. I casually walked back to the booth and grabbed a canister of salt before returning to the grave and pouring a circle around it. As I generously salted, I wondered if it would hurt the grass. I'm no expert in lawn care, but I was fairly certain that pouring copious amounts of salt on grass isn't good for it. As per my observation, the grass in this cemetery seemed to be nothing short of perfect. Then came the question of why Marcus would have me do such a thing to his beautiful cemetery. I dodged my own question, brushing it off as a silly thing to even ponder. I was here to earn money, not ask questions. After completing the first circle, I moved on to locate and eventually encircle the other three with salt. I nearly used the entire canister I had just opened to complete the circles, going off of Marcus's rule to be most assured that the circles had no gaps. After all four were complete, I retreated to the security booth. After reading the letter over again, it seemed I had completed everything I would need to do. The gate was shut, the graves were accounted for, and no trespassers were to be found. The next several hours went by quietly and uneventfully. I played around on my phone, texted a few friends, and read a couple of chapters in the book I had brought. I decided against zoning out and listening to music, not because I believed a corpse was going to pull the strings on a bell, but because I didn't feel all that comfortable sitting in a dark cemetery, alone at night, sitting in a lit-up, tiny little booth. Eventually, I got bored of sitting around and took a step outside of the booth to get a breath of fresh air. A cool night breeze greeted me as I exited the booth, with the buzz of the light inside no longer clouding my hearing. The only sound to be heard was the soft chirping of crickets. I leaned back against the booth wall and began to take a long sip of my energy drink when the sharp, piercing sound of a bell broke the calm silence and scared me half to death. I dropped the rest of my drink and spat out what remained in my mouth. The sound came from a few dozen feet away, but I couldn't see its source in the dark. I retrieved a flashlight from the closet and made my way over to the noise. I stopped and held the flashlight still. I stood in confusion for a moment as I watched the bell rock back and forth, chiming at each end. I snapped out of my trance and chalked it up to be an elaborate hoax from Marcus meant to scare me. At least that's what I told myself. Regardless of what was truly causing the bell to ring, I felt goosebumps begin to rise and paranoia set in. After coming to my senses, I ran back to the booth for another can of salt. I hurriedly returned and poured salt around the headstone. The instant the circle had been completed, the bell stopped. I took a step back and caught my breath before reassessing the severity of the situation, deciding that it wasn't that bad. I began to nervously chuckle as I slowly began to feel at ease again. I turned away from the grave and took not more than a few steps before the bell began to ring again. I turned back, feeling tense again, as I watched the bell swing back and forth and terror began to fill me. I jumped as another joined it from behind me, this one even more rapid and panicked. I didn't have time to process it before another joined in from down the path. Another on the opposite side. Only seconds passed before there were 5, 6, 7. The combined chimes of the bells culminated in a deafening collection of noise as they seemed to synchronize. Though Marcus's rule never said it explicitly, I could feel that the bells weren't a danger themselves. They warned of something that was on its way. I quickly opened the canister of salt and poured a circle around me. I started to pour enough to give myself a good 8 or 9 feet of space, but before I could finish it, I ran out. I rushed to spread the salt I had poured to complete the circle, brushing the ground like my life depended on it. After about 30 seconds, but what felt like an eternity, I finally completed my circle. I leaned back, falling onto my rear as I caught my breath and calmed down for a moment. I took deep breaths, trying to calm myself down, when every single one of the bells stopped at once. The entire cemetery went silent. Not even the chirps of the crickets remained. I felt compelled to hold my breath to avoid making a noise. My eyes darted all around me, and I kept my head on a swivel, fishing for a sign of something. This silence alone sent me into a panic, and I began to hyperventilate where I sat. I knew something had to be watching me. I felt like I was being watched all around, yet I couldn't see or hear a thing. Eventually, my eyes made their way to the corner pillar of the fence in front of me. My heart skipped a beat, and a shiver rolled down my spine as I noticed the gargoyle statue that had been at the top was no longer there. I stood back up and shifted my gaze from one corner to the next. All 4 were gone. I didn't have time to process it before the sound of harsh scraping captured my attention. I shined my flashlight to the other end of the path. Behind a tree, I could spot grass being disturbed and dirt surfacing on the side. My first instinct was that some sort of gopher had made its way into the cemetery. That idea was shattered when a large mass emerged quickly from the ground behind the tree. The dirt that crumbled and fell from around it was the only thing I could see from my position, and I dared not leave the circle. Everything was silent for a minute or two, before sharp clicking emitted from behind the tree, and a figure emerged. A corpse that was rotted to the bone was limping its way in my direction with robotic-like movements. When I say limping, you might imagine it moved like a slow old man. No, this thing made it through the entire main path of the cemetery at a sprinting pace. As it approached, my flashlight fully illuminated the monstrosity. Blackened pieces of flesh, reminiscent of putrid meat that looked as though it had been shredded to pieces, were crudely attached to the ashen-colored bones. Translucent, pale, string-like tendons hung loosely from the corpse and thrashed around as it closed in on me. From its ribcage, shriveled organs dangled and moved in the open. Its skull, with the same ashen color as the rest of the skeleton, was missing a jagged piece from the top of its right side, and from its left, a horn protruded. A horn that somehow looked like it belonged. Its jaw and teeth looked to still be perfectly intact and perfectly white, but from them, a black liquid oozed and dripped to the ground as it walked. As it approached, I looked around me for something to do, somewhere to go. My feet shuffled back and forth, aching to run, but I restrained myself from leaving the circle. It kept its pace until it stopped dead in front of the salt circle, mere feet away from me. I had to catch my balance as I nearly fell back and out of the salt circle, dropping the flashlight from my shaking hands in the process. Again, everything fell silent as the jagged bones from the feet of whatever this was stood on the very edge of the circle. I didn't believe my little circle was going to keep it out. I lost all hope entirely, and despair overtook me. I cowered and ducked to my feet, holding my arms above my head as I looked at the ground, preparing to be struck down at any moment, accepting my fate. Only seconds passed before the feeling of a strong wind swooped down from above me. A crashing sound from a few dozen feet away from me followed. I reluctantly raised my head. My gaze met the stone wings attached to the back of one of the now standing gargoyle statues. The flashlight on the ground illuminated what was beyond, enough for me to see the other 3 gargoyles standing in identical positions around the corpse, which was now flat on the ground, seemingly having been thrown into the tree behind it, from where it crumpled. Remembering Marcus's letter once more, I pulled it out with my trembling hands and read the 6th rule. Turn away and close my eyes. That's all I had to do. And so I did. I heard bones crack and snap, and stone pound into the ground with a shock I could feel beneath my feet. I heard flesh being torn away like the membrane from a rack of ribs. I heard liquid spurt and splatter onto the grass like water from a sprinkler. I only looked back when the sound ceased. One gargoyle remained, its arms holding what were now disorderly remains, the deformed, detached skull neatly placed on top. I looked to the corners of the cemetery to see the other 3 gargoyles had made their way back to their original places. I turned away from the remaining gargoyle. I picked up my flashlight, and after a moment of hesitation, I finally took a step outside of the salt circle. I was still very much shaken by the quick sequence of events, but I concluded that the gargoyles weren't here to hurt me, or at least that I would be fine if I stayed out of their way. I let out a deep breath and felt the tension leave my body while I walked back toward the booth. I made it halfway there when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I felt myself tense up again. Somehow I knew something was wrong. Somehow I knew someone was standing behind me. My intuition was immediately confirmed by a sinister laughter that crudely broke the silence. A mischievous voice whispered between giggles, "You shouldn't have left your little circle." I slowly turned around and shone my light on the towering man standing in the darkest part of the cemetery, between a tree and the fence. His thin, scrunched shoulders matched the level of his skinny head and bounced up and down as he laughed, something he couldn't seem to control. He looked to be alive, yet more diseased than I imagined anyone could look. His body looked deathly skinny and scrunched together in some sort of mutated skeletal structure. I couldn't see more than his arms and head, for which I am glad, as he wore an old, dull-looking outfit like a farmer. His nails were long and dirty, much like his hands. His green-tinted, poisoned eyes bulged from his pale and sweaty head that hung forward. "You better run," the man said with a playful manner, yet a sadistic and sinister undertone. 10. I stood confused. 9. My heart sank in my chest when realized he was counting down. 8. My thoughts went to where Marcus described the location of Henry's grave. I figured that must be who this is. I booked it for the southwest corner of the cemetery. 7. Though the pants I wore restricted my movement, I had never run so hard in my life. 6. He began to shout the numbers louder. I spotted what looked to be the weathered headstone described in the letter, but before I could see it, I tripped on a larger one. My knee connected with it head-on, and I was sent tumbling to the ground, letting out a scream of pain. 5! I glanced up at the headstone I was now laying in front of. It read, Henry, and nothing else. This was it. 4. I scrambled for the box of matches in my coat pocket. 3. I pulled them out quickly but spilled most of the matches into the grass. 2. I retrieved one and lifted it to the matchbox. 1. I struck the match against the box, unsuccessful in igniting it. I failed again and again as I hastily brushed it. Here I come. Mistakenly, I looked back to see Henry's long legs carrying him at a diabolically fast pace in my direction. I knew he would be on me in less than a second. I snapped my head back to the match and box, failing one more attempt before reactively covering my head with my arms, ready once again to be struck down. A strong thud hit the ground right next to me. I flinched and rolled over, once again facing the back of a gargoyle. All 4 had come down and placed themselves between me and Henry. The 2 in the middle held him in place as he attempted to reach past and grab me. I took the opportunity and continued to strike the match. No, Henry muttered in fear. No, stop, he commanded before breaking down into nothing but incoherent screaming. I ignored him, finally striking the match and dropping it to the grass in front of me. I fell back as green flames ignited on Henry's grave. He subsequently fell silent. When I looked back, the gargoyles were gone, and all that remained was Henry standing lifeless, head hanging, and arms dangling in defeat. When I got back to my feet, I looked away from Henry and walked towards the gate. I was tempted to look back, and when I did, he was gone entirely. I gathered my things from the booth and sat with my back against the fence until the sun rose. When it did, I unlocked the gate and returned my set of keys to the booth. I walked as fast as I could out of the gate, down the street, and to my home. I didn't sleep when I got there. I don't think I slept for a few days no matter how hard I tried. Over time, it got better for the most part. I still see Marcus at the cemetery gates when I pass them from time to time. I know he recognizes me. He smiles when he sees me. I haven't talked to him since the day I met him. I don't know what I would say if I did. I have nothing to say. I haven't said a word about this to any of my roommates or friends. I don't know how I could bring it up. I don't know who in their right mind would ever believe me. Whenever I sit alone in my room in the dark, the stench of rotting meat seems to find its way back to my nose, and the auditory hallucination of clicking bones wakes me from the deepest of sleep. When I shut my own eyes, I still see Henry's own green, diseased pair of eyes staring back. Whenever I'm drifting off, I'm interrupted by a countdown from his whisper. 10, 9, 8, 7, 3, 2, 1.